now so I don't forget. And we can always get this up too. And I'm sorry if I start losing my voice halfway through. My house has had a cold that's been battling through it for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, there might be a few people not making it tonight. It kind of depends on their day too. So I'm just kind of going through the list here.
Yeah, for sure. We've got some time, so.
Yeah. Hey Devin, did your crew show up? Is Cody, Amy, Kyle, and Ryan there?
You might have to unmute. Everybody gets muted once they come in, so.
Yeah. Should be I think a group of 5 there. Derek, I think you said you had a few people coming over there.
Yeah, a couple of them couldn't make it, so it's just me and the wife. So
Okay, fair enough. That works.
Got anything aging in the barrel back there?
No, nothing yet. I had planned to do a barrel aged Manhattan, but I haven't got around to it yet.
What are you using as the base?
Hey?
What were you planning on using as the base?
The E.H. Taylor their straight rye.
Ooh. I'm gonna come and visit you, Dean. We can travel again.
Everybody expects that back to be full of Van Winkles and antique collection and everything else, and it's not. It certainly is not.
I sat in on the last whiskey presentation that they did, and there was a guy from might have actually been a Canadian, but he was I think he was American. No, he was Irish, but he was a brand ambassador, and he had a very impressive wall behind him. So I feel like you should aim for what he had. I think it was sorted by distillery.
Yeah, I've got a couple, single barrels. I've got that E.H. Taylor Amaranth of the Gods, or Amaranth Grain of the Gods, and I'm hoping to get my hands on a bottle of Blanton's Gold here, but that all depends on a few things. No Van Winkle though. No Van Winkle, no Stag, no antique collection, unless I can get in line before everybody else.
Yeah.
Get in line with the regular folk.
Yep, that's no special privileges for me here. So
Do you at least get like really cool tours of the distillery?
I did go down there. It would have been early 2020. So just before everything kind of hit the fan here, I did get an opportunity to go down to Buffalo Trace. So there's a couple pictures I have in this presentation that I was able to snap while I was down there. Because of COVID, we weren't able to head to New Orleans to go to the Sazerac house, unfortunately. And we were supposed to head out to Montreal sometime this year to the old Montreal distillery that's now back up and going and ready for people to go see, but who knows?
Yeah.
Give people just a couple more minutes here just in case. I'm going to see if I can share the correct screen with everybody. Amanda, can you tell me if you see a presentation up there?
Sure do. Sazerac and bourbon, a brief distillery history.
That's what I want. And I'll still Zoom's a little newer to me. Amanda knows we're a Microsoft Teams company, so
You got it. You're like an old pro.
yeah. I think that's. I don't know. Have you seen anybody else come in there, Dustin, or are we good to go here?
No, I think we're good. Just maybe keep an eye on the waiting room throughout the presentation just in case. And like there's a few other people not online. But yeah, I guess it's just keep an eye on the waiting room and maybe pull them in if they do log in. So
Yep, perfect. We will do so. All right, let's get started then. I guess first off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dean Clayton. I am the Sazerac marketing manager for Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So what I do is I look after the Sazerac portfolio for all of Manitoba, all of Saskatchewan for Chart and Hobbs group of companies. And what that usually entails is doing things like this, going to customers to discuss some of our bourbons, some of our other offerings, as well as any of the marketing that we have to do in the market. So anytime you see any savings on any of our bottles, that's done through myself, as well as some help from Amanda in Saskatchewan. So for this presentation, we'll just do a kind of distillery history, more on the Buffalo Trace than on the 1792. But we'll give you a little bit of insight on that one as well. And then we'll kind of take you through the process of distilling a bourbon, kind of some best practices when you're tasting bourbons. If there is any questions, certainly just speak up, let me know. We'll kind of have a chance at the end of this as well to talk. But if something comes up and you say, hey, I have a question now, don't hesitate, just to speak up, let me know, and I'll try and answer it the best I can. So first off, ABCs of bourbon, pretty simple, but we'll go through them quick. All bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. Simplest form of being able to say that. American bourbon must be produced in the US, but it can be made in any state. Technically, you could have a Hawaiian bourbon. It's not going to say Kentucky straight bourbon on it. Barrel aged bourbon must be aged in new charred oak barrels. Barrels can be any type, but must be new. So you can't have something that's been used to, say, age a sherry or a wine or anything like that. C is for corn. So all bourbon must be made with at least 51% corn, and the remainder is usually rye, wheat, and barley. Buffalo Trace has taken that a step further with a lot of their experimental bourbons. If you were on earlier, I talked about my bottle of E.H. Taylor Amaranth of the Grains, where they actually use an amaranth grain to produce that bottle. D is for distilled, no higher than 160 proof. Entry proof, E, bourbon must not enter the barrel higher than 125 proof, which is 62.5 ABV. F is for filled, bourbon must be bottled at a minimum of 40% or 80 proof. And G, genuine, bourbon cannot have any artificial ingredients added. So no colors, no flavors, nothing like that. So what you see is the product that's coming out of that barrel. When we take a look at our bourbon, there's a few different kinds. We're going to talk about 4 here. Straight bourbon must be aged for a minimum of 2 years. So that's anything like your Buffalo Trace. Obviously, we age it longer, but it has to be barrel aged for a minimum of 2 years. The Kentucky straight bourbon must be made in Kentucky and aged for a minimum of 2 years again. Single barrel is all liquid in a particular bottle must come from, oh, we got somebody else here. There we go. Must come from one single barrel, and then a small batch, which all liquid in a particular barrel or bottle is made from a small number of barrels. There's no legislation on what small batch constitutes. Most are anywhere between 10 and 16 barrels. Some go a little bit more, some go a little less. But again, there's no law saying how much it has to be, so it's kind of a gray area there. We also have barrel proof, so bourbon that is bottled within 2% of its barrel proof without being diluted with water. your full proof, which is bottled at entry proof or 125 proof. If the spirit's higher than this, it'll be diluted to the standard. And then bottled in bond. So bottled in bond is governed by the Bottled Bond Act of 1867. It's the highest standard of quality in bourbon making. Must be a minimum of 4 years, 50% ABV or 100 proof. It has to be aged in a federally bonded warehouse and produced by a single distillery in a single distilling season, no outsourcing. So you'll see a lot of the bottled in bond with the Sazerac E.H. Taylor products. Most of those are bottled in bond at that 50%. So I'll quickly kind of go over the distilling process. For those who aren't new to bourbon, you probably have seen this over and over and over again, but I think it's always a good thing just to show how much of this process and what it actually takes to create some of these products. So it starts off with grinding the grain. Buffalo Trace uses a hammer mill to grind their grain and their corn. When they're cooking the grain, they boil the water to 240 degrees and cook the corn for about an hour. They'll add the rye as it cools, adding malted barley last, and that creates your sweet mash. So that's your start of your product. Fermentation starts with adding a previously distilled mash. So something that was produced 4 or 5 days ago will go into this to start the fermentation process. And this creates a sour mash, adding the yeast, and the yeast will actually consume the sugar in the product, creating a product that's around 7.5% alcohol. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show on the screen. You can actually see the bubbling of this product. That's not boiling, that is the yeast. So that was actually a video that I took at the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Pretty amazing. It really does look like that whole giant thing is boiling, and there's no heat outside of the heat that's being created by the yeast. Next we go to the distilling part. The sour mash is sent to the still, meets the steam rising from below, and alcohol is vaporized and condensed into a liquid that's about 120, or that is 120 proof. Alcohol is then distilled again in a doubler up to 135 proof. And at this point, the whiskey is as clear as water. So you can see in that second picture there, there looks like water that's running through that little almost birdhouse looking thing. That is the distilled 135 proof product. You can actually, when you're at the distillery, they will take a scoop, they will stick it in there, they will pull it out, and they'll actually pour it in your hands. What you're doing is you'll rub them together, and they'll tell you to smell it. And first off, you get the corn, and they'll tell you again and smack your hands together, and you smell it again, and now you're smelling some of the sweetness. And by the time you've done that for a third time, the product's completely dissipated from your hands. Your hands actually feel very nice and soft because it's pretty much all that's left is corn oil. So you just have some corn oil that's on your hands. So it's actually a great moisturizer. But it's actually really interesting to see and smell the differences as you rub that together and smack your hands together, what those, you really can tell what's being produced in that product and what that smell actually is. The last is the bottling. So once it's determined, I shouldn't say the last, you will age the product first, obviously, and then we will get to the bottling. So once it's determined a barrel has been correct profile, the bourbon is emptied, filtered, and then every bottle is filled by hand and corked by hand. That is every bottle of Buffalo Trace. You can see here, the people who work this line on slow days will be cutting the grass. They'll be doing odd jobs around the distillery. Everybody at that distillery does 3 or 4 different things depending on what's going on at that time. This is the same line that bottles Buffalo Trace. It's the same line that bottles Blanton's. It's the same line that bottles the E.H. Taylors or the Stags. So it's actually a really cool place. The room itself is probably only 1,000, maybe 1,200 square feet. It's very small. We had somebody from the MBLL down there. This was before I got hired. He was in there, he was looking. They were bottling Blantons at the time. He just decided to stick his hand in the corks and shut down the entire bottling line because he put his hand in a clean area. So they had to stop it. He tried to throw the cork back into the thing, almost to say, I didn't do anything. Joke that his picture is given to security at the front. He's not allowed back. And we jokingly say that, of course, they would have him back, but we know that the guys there would very quickly have a wanted poster and it would be all over that distillery grounds. So, but very cool. Like I said, going in there, if you guys or anybody does ever get a chance to go down to Kentucky, to Frankfurt, to see the Buffalo Trace distillery, it's an incredible place with some very, very great tour guides, including some that have been there since they were 5 years old. Freddie, who is well known there and within bourbon things, he's been there. His grandfather worked there. His dad worked there. He worked there and is now the most sought after tour guide that we've got, to a point where they have actually created his own line of root beer that you can buy at the gift shop there. So after we kind of talked about that, a little bit more on the Buffalo Trace distillery itself. They've been making whiskey since 1773 continuously. They have not stopped. They've distilled through Prohibition, floods, both world wars. Most of the reason they were able to go through Prohibition is they were distilling medicinal bourbon. Seems a little weird to say that, but they actually got permission from the government to distill medicinal bourbon. They will produce about 10 million liters of whiskey per year. That is only going up. They have invested about $200 million since 2016 in building new warehouses, upgrading facilities, and a few other things there. So Buffalo Trace is also the most award-winning distillery in the world. That's in all. That's single malt Scotch, that's Canadian whiskey, that's bourbon. Buffalo Trace is the #1 most award-winning distillery in the world. It's something that they hang their hat on and are incredibly proud of. So a couple firsts. The first American distillery to win Distillery of the Year in 2020 or in 2000. The first American distillery to win Distiller of the Year award from Whiskey Magazine in 2005. They were the first to commercially market a single barrel bourbon, which was Blanton's back in 1984. They're the first to incorporate the use of steam power and steam in general. So they use steam to actually regulate the temperature in their warehouses so that they can get a more constant temperature, better for aging. With Kentucky, you can get some very highs and lows. You can get below zero temperatures. You can get plus 30 temperatures. So they've been able to, over the years, figure out the sweet spot, and using steam, they're able to do that. So they were the first to use reverse osmosis to further purify the water, and the first to ship whiskey down the Mississippi. So Buffalo Trace Distillery is right on the river, built on the limestones that were there, and it's yeah, they were the first to ship it down the Mississippi River. I just wanted to go through one thing here. Justin kind of asked me just a little bit of, before we get into the tasting, best practices for tasting. So what they suggest is using the Kentucky Chew process for tasting bourbons. Simple start is your glass. A Glencairn glass is usually one of the best to utilize. Everybody kind of has one. Anything that's got a tapered mouth would be best. Tulip as well. It just allows that the nose to come off and out of the barrel the best they can. So first off is observing the color of the liquid. The lighter the hue, the lighter the taste. Usually means the less time is spent in the barrel. Step 3 is to sniff the whiskey by placing your nose slightly inside the glass. Angle it so that you can appreciate that aroma. Don't close your mouth. Keep your mouth slightly open. It allows you to bring in a little bit more of those aromas and the nuances that they bring. You can swirl around the whiskey just to open up some of the aromas again and to sniff. Step 4 is to sip. Put it in the center of your palate. Don't swallow immediately. Roll it around in your mouth and almost chew it around your tongue. So I'm not saying you have to open your mouth and start chawing away, but like I say, they say that Kentucky chew is just to roll it around, use your mouth, use your teeth to bring it to every part of your tongue and every part of your mouth. And then step 5 is to repeat until your glass is empty. Never waste a drop. So Buffalo Trace uses essentially 3 different mash bills. The first one we're going to talk about is a wheated mash. If you wanted to right now, you could pour yourself, if you haven't already, your Weller, so the Weller Special Reserve. So these percentages are not exact. Obviously, they are proprietary. We do not know what they are. I don't know what they are. My guess is there are very few people at the distillery who know what they are. And those would be Harlan and Drew Mayville's inner circle, who know exactly what's going on there. So the wheated mash is 51% corn, around 16% wheat, around 14% barley, and then a few other things that are mixed into there. This is our Weller, any of our Weller antique products, as well as our Pappy Van Winkle and any of the Van Winkle products. So I would say every whiskey festival that I do, I get 3 or 4 people who come up to me and we start talking about wheated bourbons. And I get the, well, bourbon can't have wheat in it. But no, it can. It absolutely can. Well, no, there's nothing I've ever heard of is a wheated bourbon. And you bring, have you ever heard of the Van Winkles? Well, of course, who hasn't heard of the Van Winkles? It's wheated bourbon. Well, no. Yeah, pretty sure of that. So yeah, anybody who's saying you can't have a wheated, it's that old style. It's a lot of those guys are the same guys who say a blended Scotch isn't a real Scotch. It has to be a single malt. There are some incredible blended single malt or blended Scotches that are 18 years old and 12-year-old Scotches that are blended to make a wonderful product. These guys just and gals just can't accept that sometimes, which is too bad because they're missing out on some wonderful bourbons. So a little bit about WL Weller Special Reserve. This is the original wheated bourbon. It's produced with that wheated mash we talked about, aged approximately 6 or 7 years and bottled at 90 proof, so 45%. Over the last couple of years, this product has garnered a whole lot more attention than it has in the past, mostly because of the price point. I say it outkicks its price, or if you ever heard the analogy of outkicking its coverage, using the football analogy, this is a product that I find is not only something that the new bourbon drinker would appreciate, but it's got a lot of complexities that a seasoned bourbon drinker will appreciate. So I don't know if you guys have heard me and Dustin talking a little bit about poor man's Pappy. Somebody several years ago figured that if they mixed the Weller 107 and the Weller 12 year, they produce something that is similar to the old Rip Van Winkle 10-year-old, or the Lot B, I should say. Outside of that mash bill, there's nothing that's even close. We've talked to a lot of our guys who know these products inside and out. Yeah, and it's just not there. So if you guys have your Weller, let's give it a try here. I am, like I said, getting over a bit of a cold here. So if you see me resort to my little black book here, it's because my taste buds really aren't fully there when we start doing some of the tasting notes. So again, taking a look at it, it's very light. So like I said, 6 to 7 years. So this isn't something that spent a whole lot of time in bourbon ages in a barrel, but it still does have a nice caramel color. So on the nose with this one, for myself, and what I'm saying here is going to be different than what you're tasting there. Tastes and nose and all that, it all depends on your palate. Don't ever let somebody tell you that what you taste isn't actually there. Everybody's going to taste something differently. When you see these online and people are doing it, they will say what they think. They will have, they'll have those general tasting notes that you will find, but everybody's is going to be different. So for me personally, I get brown sugar, a little bit of Granny Smith apple, and a slight floral note. On the taste, right off the bat, I get honey, not overly oaky. And then as it's starting to finish here, I get burnt citrus. So almost like a burnt orange peel. On that finish, lots of peppery notes at the end, a little bit of cinnamon. But all around, like I said, it's a lighter bourbon, no rye in this one at all. So you're not going to get overly spicy notes on this one, which the rye does tend to give you. But like I said, just a wonderful, well-balanced bourbon. This can be used in cocktailing. It's not my go-to personally, but it would certainly give yourself to something that's not, you'd have to have the right combination. You're not going to use this in a Manhattan where it's going to be overpowered by a vermouth or anything like that. But, certainly if you wanted to pair this with a citrus, maybe like a brown derby type of an idea, I think it would go very well. Does anybody have any notes that they pick up that they want to share? Okay. Like I said, then step 5, finish it up.
And if you do want to share something like for everyone else out there, you actually have to manually unmute yourself. So don't be yelling at your screen that no one can hear you.
Thanks, Dustin. I forgot. It does automatically mute you when you come into here. So certainly, if you do want something, I'm not ignoring you. It's possible that you're just. Yeah, absolutely. Do we have someone? Sorry, Devin, I couldn't hear that.
What was that brown derby?
Brown derby is bourbon with grapefruit juice and bitters.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, it's a really easy, simple drink. Like I said, I think it's just Angostura bitters. But again, those are things you can play around with, whether you wanted to use the orange bitters. Grapefruit juice is, like I said, for this one pairs, I think, very well, just because of, from what I feel, is there's some citrus notes, especially on the finish. But again, I haven't tried this one in too many cocktails personally, because I find this is just one of those perfect sipping. Okay, so our next one is Mash Bill 1. So Mash Bill 1 is the mash bill that's used for Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, E.H. Taylor products. 51% corn or over, and then less than 10% rye, and it's balanced with wheat and barley. So this one is our most general one. Most of the products out of Buffalo Trace do use Mash Bill 1. And when we kind of see that you've got all these different products that are coming from the same mash bill, the changes really have to do with how long it's been in the barrel, which warehouses it's been in, what floors it's been in. Obviously, the higher up in these warehouses is going to be warmer than on the bottom floor. And like I said, these guys that work there, and Harlan and Drew, they've got this thing down to a science. So they know exactly what they need to do to get a certain flavor profile. So we can start with the Buffalo Trace now. If you want to pour yourself a Buffalo Trace. So this is produced using that Mash Bill 1, aged approximately 8 years. At one time, it did have an 8-year age statement on it. It does not anymore. That's not to say that we've brought down the age of it. It's just sometimes if we're aging one of those barrels up high in one of the warehouses, it may hit the right point at 6.5 years or 7 years. Some of those ones in the bottom of those warehouses might take 9 or 10 years to get to the point where Drew Mayville is blending to create that Buffalo Trace flavor. So that's why there is no age statement, because we can't guarantee that it's going to be for 8 years. But I can tell you that most of them are between that 7 and 9 year. Anything over top of that, you start getting into your Eagle Rares, your Stag products, stuff like that. Personally, I think this is the perfect cocktailing bourbon. I do believe it's got a little bit of that spiciness by adding just a little bit of that rye. It does have those citrus notes. It's a little bit more bold than the Weller, and it can stand up to those secondary flavors like the vermouths, like mint, and things like that. So just looking at it, you can see, even if you went side by side to the Weller, this is a little bit darker, more that deep honey color. On the nose, first thing I get here always is cherry. That's something that I always pick up right away. You do get that citrus, you do get honey in terms of a sweetness. So taste, again, I get that honey, I get anise. It's almost like a little bit of a black licorice, vanilla, a little bit of stone fruit. So you look at those, the peaches, stuff like that. And then when it finishes, a peppery spice. It lingers quite long, and it's got a very woody finish. So it really does impart a lot of flavor from those oak barrels that it's using for the aging. But like I said, it's one of those ones as just simply like this, a little bit of water, just an eyedropper of some distilled water actually opens up the nose to me a little bit more. It really does bring out that cherry. And in a cocktail, like I said, the cherry and the vanilla work very well if you're doing an old fashioned. Like I said, I think it's got enough of a rye note and a peppery note to stand up to the mint if you're doing a mint julep. Like I said, just a perfect cocktailing bourbon. And then the third major mash bill for Buffalo Trace is mash bill 2. So this one here is our Blanton's mash bill. Over 51% corn, between 12 and 15% rye, balanced out with wheat and barley. Unfortunately, we don't have Blanton's to taste. I am trying as hard as I can to get Saskatchewan more of this. We're working on it. I promise you, I am doing everything I possibly can. And because Dustin's been so gracious to help us out with a lot of these things, if I can get a few, I will try my hardest to get them into leader. Can't promise it. I'm not promising it. I will try my hardest. I don't want you guys emailing me back after this. Dean promised Blanton's. Dean is going to get us Blanton's. I will try. I will try.
This is recorded. You know what? We might have to go back on this just to rehear what you say.
That's why I said I will try 7 times. I may send you a copy, but the original stays with me. So the other product we're going to talk about is the 1792. So this is the Barton Distillery. It's separate from Buffalo Trace. Again, I have not visited this distillery. It's certainly one that I hope I get a chance to. But my knowledge on this one is a little less than Buffalo Trace, and I didn't want to just regurgitate what I could find online either. So Barton's been making whiskey since 1879. It's the oldest fully operational distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. It's got 29 barrel aging warehouses on site, and Sazerac did purchase this back in 2009 from Brown Foreman, I believe. Again, this is before my time. The name 1792 comes from the honor of the year that Kentucky joined the U.S. And it did produce He Who Shall Not Be Named World Whiskey of the Year in 2020. And that was the 1792 full proof. Huge honor, slightly soured due to some things that have come out about Jim Murray, but nonetheless, the guy has a fantastic palate, knows his whiskeys, and is a great honor. So the 1792 mash bill is a rye mash. So, oh, that is incorrect. That should be 51%. Oops, 51% corn, balanced with rye and barley. The Sazerac rye is 51% rye. So because 1792 is still considered a bourbon, it is 51% corn minimum. So the 1790 small batch, like we talked about, it is a small amount of barrels that are blended to create this product. I can tell you that it is on average 12 barrels for the 1792. Bottles at 93.7 proof. And again, this is a high rye mash, aged for approximately 8 years. If we want to have a taste of it here now. Again, this one here, about, color to about the same as the Buffalo Trace. Again, we are looking at approximately 8 years, but these barrels can be 7 years, 9 years, 10 years. Again, it's all going to depend on what creates that blend. So with this one here, and there's an actual word for it that I can't remember for the life of me, but it's the banana. Right off the bat, I get banana on the nose. Lots of caramel. And as you get into that, you almost get an ethanol undertone. And that's not to say it smells like gas. Please don't ever think if I say ethanol that I say it smells like gas. It's just got that alcohol nose to it. So you know that you've got a higher alcohol content than, say, the Buffalo Trace or the Weller, which was your 90 proof. So again, here I get that banana again. Really long, lingering flavor. Oak, peppercorn, cardamom, a little bit, just at the end here. Really spicy finish, almost like a mint note at the end. Like I said, it's a very long, lingering product or bourbon, but really nice. Again, it's the flavor of it does not make me think that this is 93.7. This makes me feel like this is a 80 proof bourbon, 40% bourbon. I find that the spiciness that you get is not the alcohol burn that you may get in something that's higher, like a bottled and bond. It's those notes of that peppercorn. It's the notes of that cardamom that I'm getting. But again, for me, it's an overpowering banana note, not only on the nose, but on that first taste.
That banana note comes from an acetate ester kind called isoamyl acetate.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And now you can see why it's not something that I just have rolling around, in my head.
What do you mean? It totally rolls right off the tongue, that one. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm a bourbon drinker. I am not a scientist, right? I'm in sales. Two very different things. So these are just a couple pictures of the Buffalo Trace Distillery. As you can see in the top left, these are one of the 12 or 13 new warehouses that they're building on site. When I was there, they had built 2 of them. I believe 8 or 9 are up now for the past 2 years. These warehouses will hold 58,800 barrels when completed. And I know that seems like just an arbitrary number. That is legally the largest amount of barrels that can be held in a warehouse in Kentucky if you want to be considered a bottled and bond warehouse. So when we talk about that bottled and bond, and we talk about having to be government controlled, that is one of them. You cannot hold any more barrels than that. Picture 2, top right. Buffalo Trace, the distillery, is a National Historic Site. So when they decided that they wanted to put in brand new 92,000 gallon fermentation tanks, they had hoped that they could just tear down the building, build a new building around it, or actually dig underneath and put them lower. Unfortunately, because it's a historic thing, they were unable to do that. And the only way they could accommodate those new fermentation tanks was to literally cut the roof off, jack it up, and then build around it. So they had to keep that original roof, they had to keep the original floor, but they could build around it. So while I was there, they were just bringing in the fermentation tanks. So they had already built around, this is not my picture. They had already built around it, ready for it. The new floor had been poured and they were just bringing in the tanks. Picture 3 in the bottom left is the old-fashioned copper warehouse, the OFC warehouse. It's one of the first buildings that was there when E.H. Taylor, Colonel E.H. Taylor, built Buffalo Trace Distillery. It is still used to house barrels. It is an incredible building to get a chance to walk around in. Yeah, it's just phenomenal. And really, outside of the outer metal facade of the new ones, it looks the exact same inside those new ones as it does in the OFC. Same wooden pillars, same wooden floors. The only difference is with the metal, they're able to adjust the temperature a little bit better. And then bottom right, that's just a aerial view of all of the new builds for all the warehouses up there. So I don't know how many, I didn't count before how many are there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 7 that are there, or 6 plus 1 being built. So if you want to do some quick math on that, that's a lot of barrels of Buffalo Trace. And to be honest, that's where a lot of those are going to be. We're at a point now where allocations for Buffalo Trace are at a standstill, where before we were getting more and more. They just can't keep up with it. And that's not only in Canada, that's in the US, as well as some of the overseas. Couple more pictures. These are my photos. So top left, all those barrels up, or all those bottles up there are the Buffalo Trace experimental collection. So every year, Buffalo Trace will try something different just to see what happens. Most often, these do not go on sale. If they find one that actually does work, it will go on sale. We will never see it here. But you may be able to find it if you go to Ontario or Alberta, potentially. And even then, they may get a case, which would be 6 bottles. Doesn't happen very often. To look at some of these and the things they've tried, whether it's rice, adding that into the mash, or pea flour, or, I mean, they have tried everything you could ever think of.
Wait, did the pea flour turn it purple?
I don't know. I don't think it's the pea flour like that. I think it's literally ground.
Oh, ground peas. Got it.
Yeah. So I mean, there's everything. They've done different kinds of corn, all that kind of stuff. So that's the same down the bottom there. Top right is actually the view from the newly built, while I was there, VIP cabin. This is where the high rollers will come if they are picking out their barrels and have the opportunity to stay. It's beautiful. Again, a place that I will never get a chance to stay outside of going and visiting it when I'm on a tour. And it's just incredible. This is where you'd have guys who are running Loblaws, who are doing something, who are going down there. Guys like, if he ever went down there, because he is a big fan, Joe Rogan would get that opportunity to stay up there. It's not for the Tom, Dick, and Harrys. In the bottom right, this is the micro still that's used for all the experimental bourbons, as well as the Warehouse X bourbons. And I'll talk a little bit more about Warehouse X coming up. It's something that if you've kind of heard of it, it's a really cool thing that Buffalo Trace is doing just to take control of everything they possibly can with bourbon making. So Warehouse X was built in 2013. And what it is used for is they are able to, in these small little chambers, make sure that they can control everything. Air, cool, humidity, sunlight, artificial sunlight. I mean, it is everything. So there's 4 chambers, each holding about 30 barrels on ricks. And then there's an open, I guess you call it a breezeway through the center that they can also do it if they're wanting to try some things there. Right now, they're testing 4 variables: natural versus UV light, temperature, humidity, and airflow. So again, they can open up the doors and say, all right, what happens if we, in the middle of winter, crack open all these doors and just let it at 0 degrees? What's that going to do to the aging process? They know it's going to slow it down, but what is that going to do to the bourbon inside? So a series of experiments are planned over the next 20 years, several lasting a couple of years, and then some 6-year experiments that are based on results from earlier tests. All these experimental bourbons are distilled using one of the micro stills that we saw in the previous slide. And that still is a combination of a pot and a column still. So it's a one-of-a-kind micro still that Harlan Wheatley actually had a hand in building. Yeah, so this is high-tech bourbon.
Harlan Wheatley is the master distiller at Buffalo Trace.
Harlan Wheatley is the master distiller. Thank you, Amanda. He has been, and I talk a little bit more about Harlan a little later, but he was the next in line following, the greats of E.H. Taylor, George T. Stagg, Colonel Bland, all those guys, and Harlan is next. You've also heard me talk about Drew Mayville. So Drew Mayville is the master blender at Buffalo Trace. Drew Mayville actually got his start with Seagram's in Canada with Diageo. He then left to go down to Buffalo Trace to be their master blender. And funny enough, 3 years ago, Sazerac bought Seagram's and it all came full circle. So he now does all of the Seagram's products that are done down in Kentucky, which is very minimal right now. But anything that is blended or released or anything like that, there's 2 people in that building that every product goes through, and that's Harlan and Drew. So the guy here in this picture, that is Harlan. One of his babies here is the whiskey farm. So Buffalo Trace has an on-site farm where they will grow corn and other grains for their small batch and experimental bourbons. So these are, those experimental ones that you saw in those pictures, as well as the stuff they're doing in Warehouse X. So their first batch was in 2016. It was distilled and barreled that summer. It was an old Taylor recipe. So this is an old E.H. Taylor recipe that they had done. That was used in the same recipe that E.H. Taylor used back in the 1700s. In 2018, they actually planted neon pink corn. So when I say neon pink corn, the kernel itself is corn. It does not, or is pink. It does not turn the bourbon pink. So this is a single estate bourbon that they are, once it's done aging, they will sell and use to donate profits to breast cancer research. So it's something that's really cool they're doing there. They also went and planted a blue corn and a white corn, and they're distilling that into a bourbon that's going to be released for a future anniversary of Kentucky joining the US, because Kentucky's flag colors are blue and white. they decided that this is the best way to showcase Kentucky and where they came from. Oops. Yeah. Another really cool thing that happened in 2016 on the Buffalo Trace Distillery is Bourbon Pompeii. So in 2016, Buffalo Trace began renovations on one of the historic OFC buildings to create a new event space. As they were digging out the floor, they unearthed old brick and limestone structures underneath, and these ended up being original fermenters that Colonel E.H. Taylor had built in 1883. I've got a picture showing you a few things here. So in 2018, the distillery rebuilt fermenter number 7 with bricks found during that archaeological excavation. They lined the sides and the bottom back with copper like it would have been back in 1883. It was connected to a microstill with new piping in 2019 for the first time in over 100 years, and is currently aging an old style sour mash whiskey that's been done in these new distillers. So here's just an old lithograph that they had, and they really didn't know where any of this was. It was a cool picture of one of the buildings, long forgotten. But here's where they started digging, and you can see here, obviously, the floor. When we go here, you can actually see where they dug up floor and where those stills were. So it's something that was really cool. This was actually some of the archaeological dig site that they had done. You can see kind of right to the middle there, those limestone bricks and stuff that are stacked up, and that would have been the actual distillers. And here is what it was, and then when it was lined with the new copper and actually fermenting. So you can see this is the second one from the stairs. So when I was there, they had redone this. So I was there was nothing in the actual fermenter at the time, but we were able to see the rebuilt fermentation tank, which was awesome. Like I said, it's something that they plan on redoing a few of them and releasing, special editions. Again, we're never going to get them, but they'll be really cool to see. And if you're lucky enough to head down to Buffalo Trace, they do tastings where you may get that opportunity. I know guys have gone down there and they've been able to sample some of the Mr. Sam products that have been done there, some of the experimental E.H. Taylor stuff. It really all depends on who's there that day, who's running it. You've got a great chance of running into Harlan or Drew. And I know it seems like I'm pushing my own product and my own thing, but I really can't oversell how cool of a place this is. So that's kind of the end of my presentation here. I hope it was informative. I hope you guys had a chance to learn a few things about some of the bourbons we have. I hope you had a chance to maybe learn to appreciate bourbon if you were a Canadian whiskey drinker before, you're a single malt guy or gal. I hope this is something that you've kind of been able to take a look at and really appreciate. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys being here and listening to me babble on for a little over an hour. If there's any questions, I will try answer them the best I can. If I don't know, I can certainly find out and get some information back to you. But I am going to just stop sharing here. And I think we're back up to just me. So I apologize for that. Is there any questions? Either what you've seen here, anything else about Buffalo Trace or Sazerac that I can try help you with? I will try to do my best. And then I think, Dustin, I don't know if you want to do your draw for that bottle now or see if there's some questions first.
Let's do some questions first. Actually, I have one question. You had mentioned something about just Buffalo Trace allocations in general. A little while ago, I think, was it the US and the EU stopped fighting and then lifted tariffs, so there wasn't tariffs on bourbon and scotch anymore. What do you see? Is that going to be problematic for us Canadians to get bourbon in general, like even just the, I guess you could say basic stuff?
Yeah, there will be. I mean, there's always going to be certain things, right? For instance, when 1792 ended up winning World Whiskey of the Year,
Right.
we knew we were going to get a bump in sales. We couldn't anticipate what it was. So even the small batch, which used to be something we could order freely, nobody cared, we could bring in as much or as little as we wanted, has become allocated now. So there's things like that that we can't really see. We can forecast slightly, but we can't get it all. For the most part, and I say this because sometimes it does change, Sazerac is very good. If you have an allocation of X number of cases, they will do everything in their power to make sure that you don't get any less than that the next year. Now, the only things that could do that is obviously some of these barrels that are aging longer than 8 years, instead of getting your 21 cases out of it, you may only get 17 cases, right? You lose enough to Angel Share or to anything like that, or certain barrels don't live up to Drew and Harlan's very, very high, they're what they feel is an adequate representation of the product, then they won't release it, which we saw this year with the George T. Stagg products, that there isn't a release this year, as well as some of the Van Winkle products are very limited just because the product didn't live up to it, to the hype that they wanted to. You'll hear a lot of people say things like, oh, that's just creating more want for it, and they're doing this on purpose. We're not. We've got enough that we can make do with what we do. Van Winkle products are notoriously held back. They just don't produce that much. They know what they have there. They know what people want to see with that, and that's just what they want to do. So I can't speak to other companies for sure, but for ours, they will do everything they possibly can to make sure that anything that we have in 1 year, we should get a similar amount the next year.
Nice.
I think it's really interesting too, because even when we have people come up to Canada from the distillery, and Dean, you can speak more to this, but you have somebody come up and they go, oh my God, there's this on the shelf. How do you guys have this on the shelf? They must have just put it on the shelf. And you're like, no, it's a general list here. And they're always kind of astounded by it, for the sole fact that if you go to a lot of places down in the States, even in Kentucky itself, you have a limit of 1 or 2 bottles, and that's all you can buy at a time. So it's really interesting seeing kind of the 2 different mentalities of it as well.
And you're right, Amanda. We had our Canadian whiskey brand president come up to Canada. I guess it was in early 2020. He was actually taking pictures of the Weller Special Reserve on the shelf in Manitoba and sending it to his buddies, because he could not believe that it wasn't under lock and key, that it was actually product on the shelf, or anything like that. So it's Amanda's right. We are lucky enough to get products that even people who live in Kentucky don't get a sniff at.
What do you do with the like, not you, but the distillery, like all the Stag and whatnot, of course, because I mean I follow it ridiculously close.
Yeah.
Do they just chuck it? Is it gone? Like, do they put it into anything? Is it?
So you're talking about the stuff that they aren't releasing this year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of those, just because they're saying that it's not good for release now, that might mean that they just want to have another year of it in the barrel, or they're going to put it into a different warehouse where they think the aging process can either speed up, or another factor that they feel is missing can be done. So I'm not going to say they never throw out bourbon. I'm sure it happens, but most of the time they'll be able to find a way, whether that's, like we talk about, those mash bills are the same all the way around. So it may never become a George T. Stagg product. It may fit the mold of a George T. Stagg Jr. or a Eagle Rare 15-year-old, or something like that, where they could blend it into something that's useful. The amount of time and money that goes into each barrel to pour it down, it's not going to happen very often. Like I said, I'm not going to say it'll never happen, But I mean, there's times where you can just get too much air in it and it creates just a terrible product. And yeah, you're not going to do anything with it. But most of these will
Assume
get,
that.
yeah, they'll get repurposed or it'll get released next year, and we may have a bigger allocation next year.
Yes. Awesome. I mean, everything I read, everything I deal with, all my buddies down south, I mean, stag is all that they drink. Like, and then when they heard that, they were sending me articles like, if you find any in your remote Arctic world of Canada, please God, buy it, ship it. I'll give you hundreds of dollars. So I look everywhere, but even I can't find it. Like, it doesn't exist.
No, it's tough. Like I said, you may find last year's mid-year release that's still kind of kicking around. I know in Manitoba, they purposely hold back their allocations. So we may get it in February, but they won't release it until September. So now for us, it almost feels like we're not missing it. And we can hopefully get one coming in their next release would be their summer 2022 release. But I've also read some things, and I haven't heard if this is actually happening or not. There's the rumor that they're going to cut the George T. Stagg Junior line altogether. Don't quote me on this. It's just something that I had read the other day. I certainly won't be the first one to hear it. If it does, it'll get to the ether somewhere down in the States before I ever hear about it. But there's that possibility, right? And all that means is we may have to wait an extra year or two, but then we get more of the George T. Stagg, right? So yeah, it sucks because you kind of lose that more affordable stag product and a great product, but you get more of this higher end, fantastic product.
Hey, it's Devin Hamill here. Quick question. Where did the name Buffalo Trace come from?
So Buffalo Trace, it's actually the path that the buffalo takes. So way back before the distillery was ever made, the trace itself was the path that the buffalo took along the river. And there's a little bit more to that, but that's your basic thing. It just means the Buffalo Trail. And that's they wanted to pay homage to what was there before. And that's where they kind of came up with that. So like I said, before, it had many other names before they decided on Buffalo Trace, but that's the one there. I mean, Old Fire Copper or Old Fashioned Copper was one for the longest time. But yeah, that's essentially where it is.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Is that anybody else? Or is everybody just really waiting to get their hands on that bottle? All right, well, Dustin, I guess this is where you either make somebody's week or break a whole bunch of hearts.
Well, Amanda and Dean gave us an allocation of a case of H. Taylor here a little while ago. I kept the bottle aside for actually, I still have a few more bottles stashed away for promotional, I guess, so to speak, because it's hard to say who gets this. But I wanted to use this as a first time doing a virtual tasting with you guys to give this away to people who are here. So I do have even the groups that have that are sharing a package and together. I know Devin, you guys have a few people at your house. Everyone's in here. But yeah, this thing is, I think we retail this at our store right around that $89 mark, or I think that's what it is. I've tasted this. This is a fantastic bourbon, and someone's going to win this tonight. So get everyone right here. I'm not looking. And starts with a J. Jason, I think you're even online tonight, aren't you? Where's Jason? You're going to unmute and say hi? You had all three bottles actually. There you are, Jason. Oh, he's not going to unmute.
I don't know if it's working.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, guys.
There you go. So
Hey.
I'll have this at the store for you, Jason.
That's awesome. I'm super excited.
Awesome.
Congrats, Jason.
Good. If there's any other questions before Dean closes it off, Have at her.
And certainly if something comes up in the next day or two that you're thinking of, I don't want to put you on the spot there, Dustin, but if somebody's got a question, by all means, email me and I'll send back as much as I can or much information as I possibly can.
Awesome.
Okay.
Good stuff.
All right.
Well,
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
hopefully,
I think
hopefully with the warehouse, the number of warehouse expansions, hopefully we'll maybe start to see some bourbon make its way up to Canada as well.
we're hoping so. So, I mean, that was 2016 it started. So around 2024, potentially we could see some. Like I said, the good thing is we've been able to see increases most years on most of the products coming into Saskatchewan. We'll fight to keep doing that. We'll fight to make sure that we do get that. Sazerac is starting to notice Saskatchewan as a bourbon province, where before they were, all right, it's just Saskatchewan, Canadian whiskey. That's king there. But they're starting to see it for what it is. And that's great news because I think, like I said, with stuff like this that Dustin is doing, it's a great way to get the products out there. It's a great way to get people to try things that maybe they wouldn't normally try and find something new. So Dustin, I appreciate everything you've done for us. I'm happy to help. I mean, we can do this again in a couple months too. I'd be happy to do it. Let's see what the allocations bring and we'll see what we can do for you.
Well, I know I'm getting a lot of people saying, "Hey, we're sick and tired of virtual. Let's do something where we're all together and having fun." So maybe if you're driving through the province, we'll put it on your timeline and we'll make sure you have a nice, comfy hotel room to pass out in after. So
Absolutely. Well, I've been Amanda knows I've been itching to get out there for the past 7 months, and my company will fly me out to Vancouver for a 1-day Christmas party, but they tell me I'm not allowed to go to Saskatchewan yet. So, I mean, whatever. It's soon. As soon as I am allowed to get out here or out there, I will be out there, and we'll set something up for sure.
Okay, good.
It's been a long time since I've been to Leader, so
Well,
I have driven through it before. So
good.
it's,
Good. Well,
I did work in Saskatchewan for about a year, so I know rural Saskatchewan fairly well.
awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you guys all joining me, and thanks to Dustin for providing that bottle to the participants here and setting everything up. Really appreciate it.
Good.
Thanks, guys. It was
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dean.